Mr. Gallahue with the adequate public facility. We pulled that. No, we didn't.
We pulled the charter.
No, we have. That's okay. Whew. Adequate public facilities ordinance, the Apfo chart. Hello, Mr. Gallahue.
Hello. Thank you for having me. This is an annual report that gets approved by the board. This chart is developed from the projection, which is in the annual feasibility study. So we did the feasibility study last June, and we've gone through the budgeting process. We're nearing the end, obviously, as we've talked about that. But this is the chart that is based upon that projection. The Howard County Code requires us to provide this chart, and it's used in determining one of the components in making determinations about whether a development will go forward. And we also had the shared experience, Ms. O'Connor, of being on a committee which evaluated some potential changes, and just to make sure everyone's clear, they haven't implemented those changes, so we're still following the present code. And with that said, I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
I'll chime in and add that that is all available on the county's website under the, oh, darn it, I just clicked it off. But it's on the main page for the county's website.
With videos and everything.
Yes. Yeah. So any information you could, any question you could possibly have would be on there with regard to what we did in that committee.
Correct.
Well, I have the, Dr. Siddiqui.
Yes, can you tell us what the recommendations were, that the outcome of the committee?
With the Apfo committee, they did recommend making changes to the way the chart is done. I didn't come fully prepared on that, but right now I can tell you the chart, school is closed above 115%, and in concept the recommendation was to have a stratified system where there would be an increased contribution in the excise tax if they were above a certain percentage. But it would probably be better to take a look at that in the context of whatever the county executive might propose, because they made it pretty clear to us that they were going to develop a staff report going forward. So at this time, what we're just doing is what we've always done, is to have the chart ready with the 115% capacity utilization as closure, and I made it clear to all of the county staff. I double checked with them. I said, is there any changes this year? And because of the committee, I said, no, we haven't made any decision. The report hasn't gone forward yet. So I can follow up with a copy of that report if that would help.
That would be great.
Yeah.
The other question I had, was there the discussion surrounding the 3-year, I don't know what you call it, the 3-year rule, or the fact that after 3 years of closure, then it opens up to development, even though it remains closed on our end. It opens up to development.
There was some discussion about that. It wasn't, to my knowledge, final recommendation to change that, but there was some discussion about maybe it should be longer. Yeah, they definitely covered the waterfront. It was over 20 meetings, so we talked about a lot of different things.
All right, thank you.
Mrs. Valancourt? No, that's okay. Mrs. French?
I'm looking at the northern region.
Okay, at the elementary or the middle school level?
I'm looking at the elementary northern region.
Okay.
And so with the addition that's scheduled to be finished by August, the capacity at Waverly will be increased to 738.
Correct.
And that explains why the capacity would be at 79.4.
Yep.
And yet I'm looking at Manor Woods, which is at 161 over capacity. It says OCIP, but I don't remember what is in the CIP. What project?
Oh, well, you just named it. It's Waverly. So what we have is feasible redistricting that can occur between Manor Woods and Waverly, and we have capacity coming online at Waverly. So we have been showing OCIP when those conditions are met. It's not a capacity project for Manor Woods in and of itself.
I get you. Okay. So when you look at redistricting options, will you also be looking at relief? Because that whole northern region, you know, Centennial Lane, Hollifield Station, St. John's Lane, they're all over 115%.
Yeah,
and show no relief.
Right, and bearing in mind that the testing, the first year in this chart is 2019, so it's a little further off than.
I didn't look at the number.
And that's because of that 3-year.
It's 3 year. It's the 3-year.
Okay, so we have to fix this within 3 years.
We have some, we have a little bit of breathing room, but and of course projections each year are done. They're done annually, so there is an opportunity for us to learn more, and maybe the projections are a little lower, a little higher. So, so that's another consideration. But certainly that wave relief CIP project has been considered over the years because Manor Woods is harder to expand. It's not on sewer, so it's a more difficult consideration. So we figured that we would do a combination of a capital project and redistricting in order to resolve that situation. And there was, you know, there's considerations in the feasibility study about that future redistricting that you alluded to with some of those other schools. So,
do you think that, I know right now the desire of the majority of the people, except me, believe that we should do everything along with redistricting for the new elementary school. Do you think that that overcapacity at Manor Woods, shouldn't that be addressed sooner, like to fix it before, in order to, for the next school year for 17-18?
You can't. There's no place for them to go.
Well, I think, you want to have the capital project completed, certainly, before you take advantage of the capacity, because they're in the middle of phase construction too, so you don't want to step in there early. I think that having comprehensive redistricting, I think the most important thing to consider is you have a school to open. So you want to make sure that you have a process that can get you to the finish line on that in particular. If you bring in other neighborhoods, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could, expand the discussion and slow down the redistricting. So I think it is a consideration. You could do it either way, but if you're asking my opinion, I think that it's always focus on the capital project that you're trying to get done, which would be Elementary School 42.
I hear you, but Waverly's finished as of August, and we could move ahead and relieve that northern region.
Well, so that would be combining it with the redistricting for ES 42.
So that is definitely, okay.
That would be the next stop for that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Finished.
Yes, Mr. Gallingue.
Mm-hmm.
That is assuming that the new policy, the revised policy, is going to be the same as the policy that we have now. So, and maybe I'm not making myself clear, but we're going to have, there's a new policy, the policy committee decided to put the boundary lines up for review. And what we've been doing in the past is concentrating on moving based on just opening a new school. But what we have done is we have created schools like Phelps Luck, which has 71% free and reduced meal students, and West Friendship, who has less than 5, with 271 students. So I think that's unfair. And there are other people who think it's unfair as well. And so if we're just talking about opening up schools just to create space and not considering other programs, I think it's pretty disingenuous of us to constantly have these conversations when we have traditionally and historically, as a board, created pockets of poverty and segregation, de facto, so you can roll your eyes all you want, guys, but I'm going to say this as long as I'm on this board and when I'm gone. Business as usual cannot be continued. We cannot constantly open schools in, create housing in downtown Columbia and say, that's fine, let's make sure we have affordable housing there, and then crowd up our small schools with no place to put the children. But instead of moving kids 5 minutes up the road, we build space onto schools that are already existing. So what I say to you is, we need to think again about how we do redistricting. We need to think again about the appropriateness of having schools with 271 students in them and schools that are out west that are completely, as far as even Pointers Run, Clarksville, all of those schools out there, and not move other kids into those schools. Well, I'm looking at, I've got the feasibility study in front of me right now for 2016, 2017, and if I look on the app from the schools and I look at this information, there's often different information. I'm just saying to you all that we need to consider more than just opening up space when a school is overcrowded and moving the chairs on the Titanic around. We need to think about what we need to do to create equity in our schools.
Lacy, Dr. Allworker?
Well, actually, I agree with Ms. DeLacy that we need to consider other things beside the opening of a new school, whatever, as we think about redistricting so that we can have a more equitable, more diverse school system everywhere in the county. However, the question that I had specifically on this chart, we just all read in the paper that the county council has approved the downtown housing program or bill. Planning board, that's right.
That's a difference.
Sorry, you're right, planning board. Including allowing extra density and possible more overcrowding as a way to integrate affordable housing. Now, there was another proposal on the table that wouldn't have ended up in more. It would have had a way of including affordable housing without extending the limit on the housing units to what they are right now. My question is, these numbers, do these reflect, I mean, they can't possibly reflect that decision that was just made by the planning board. Well, so this is already obsolete.
I can answer that. There is a housing projection that is a part of the enrollment projection that's developed by Department of Planning and Zoning, and they put in phasing for future projects, particularly downtown Columbia. So if you look in the Columbia West, you see Running Brook as 130.9 in 2019, going up to 221.7% utilization. So that is directly because of additional units that are built into their housing projection that feeds our enrollment projection. And then if you look at the Columbia West for the middle schools, you also see Wild Lake. Fortunately, we have capacity there because we're building a new, larger school. So it doesn't, the effect isn't quite as acute, but you can see that school is gradually increasing. And it is possible to take those units into consideration because the Department of Planning and Zoning already had a projection for future units for downtown Columbia. Is it the exact number that was finally approved by the planning board? No, but there's definitely many units in that projection. So I think it gives a good guide, at least for going forward for the 1 year that this chart will govern. It'll get adjusted with the new chart because they'll have, once they have more exact information, they build that right into their housing projection each year. So, you know, we can't change the chart every time a new development occurs or is considered by the, well, then there would be a chart every other planning board meeting. I mean, that would probably be an onerous expectation. So they do it every year.
I'm sorry, but for myself and for anyone else listening out there, when they make a decision on additional housing in certain areas, are they looking at our capacity situation? Because they're building right where we're most crowded.
They don't care.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not, why are you laughing? I mean, I'm sorry,
Exactly.
it's outrageous. I mean,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And not only, well, I won't get into my issues with the newest plan, but I just think that there's got to be a better way to do this. We first of all, to close a school at 115% is already way above. I mean, we opened Duckett's Lane. It was already overcrowded. Something's not right here. I mean, who makes this decision? Who
has
do we
the
have to
money.
petition about changing the capacity?
The
I mean,
developers.
changing, and I'm sorry, not capacity, but changing the,
150.
what constitutes closing a
Right.
school? Who knows the answer?
It's a
Our
law.
policy says 90 to 110% is the capacity of, the desired capacity of our schools, because they are actually built to accommodate 10% over
Okay.
when we calculate
So
the
how do we
capacity.
get to 115?
So 115, it used to be 120. The county council made changes many years, I don't remember how long ago, to
I
take
think
it to 115.
it would help if
and
you
add it.
distinguished that you were speaking of a board policy.
Yes.
And the 115 is associated
associated
with a
with-
code requirement
Yes.
of the
County
county council.
council.
So her question was, and I'll answer it, who is responsible for code in Howard County? Their proposals are introduced by the county executive and they're voted on by the county council. And then any interpretation would be done by the county office of law. If there's an appeal or if there's a case, it would go forward in court, and in theory, a local ordinance could go all the way to the Supreme Court. I mean that's in theory, but so that's the legal trajectory for these changes. So what the county executive did, which a couple of us were a part of, was they had this committee to discuss the adequate public facilities ordinance, and much like you, there was a wide variety of thoughts about what could be done, what couldn't be done. The challenge was just that there had been an agreement about how votes would be taken with this committee, and so it ended up being pretty limited in what they ultimately decided or were able to agree to, because they had to have a majority of the total group, whether they were there or not, which is, that was something they agreed to at the beginning, and it made it a little ungainly, in my humble opinion.
Let me just help Dr. Allberger out a little bit and say that with that discussion that took place, and I said that's not what our policy said, the developers didn't want to hear a word I said. Even being on the Board of Education, they do not want to hear a word about changing our capacity because they want to build. And that's what Mr. Gallagher was talking about with that supermajority situation that we rose upon. None of the motions that people like myself and other community members made passed to even get in there.
What do you mean? There weren't enough people.
There weren't enough people. So in other words, you had to have a majority vote of, it's called a supermajority. So when somebody made a motion to lower, for example, made a motion to lower the capacity or to even suggest lowering the capacity and matching our policy, the motion wouldn't pass because of the majority, because it didn't get the majority vote that it needed. It's not like a regular majority like us. it's a supermajority.
There's a threshold.
Can I just,
Threshold.
Yeah.
I hate to go back, it would be nice if we had a report, if when you did this, there was an actual report, because I'm not on that committee, and if you're our representative, then we should have some idea. And when you conduct this, we should have some idea about the process and how it works. Because when you're talking about a supermajority of whom? I mean,
Exactly.
That's what I want to know.
Well, let's do this, Mr. Gallagher. Let's meet and we'll get together on what happened and formulate something that's more comprehensive and understandable, and we'll do that at a different date.
Yeah,
so we
to
can
the
tie
staff's
this up.
credit, there's a very thorough staff report that they put
Yeah.
together.
We'll present that at another meeting. How about that? So we can move
Okay.
forward. Okay, Dr. Siddiqui.
Yeah, one more comment and two more questions. We did hear a lot from the St. John's community this spring regarding their concerns regarding development in their area. I just wanted to point that out. My question was, number one, can you explain why there's no high schools in this report?
Yeah, sure. The code doesn't have a schools test for high schools. It originally just had elementary, and then they added middle sometime in the 90s. And that was also a topic of discussion
Yes, it
in
was.
the Adequate Public Facilities Task Force.
We can add that in, Dr. Siddiqui. I'm going to write that down.
Thank you. And then can you explain what capital improvement would open up in the,
I'm sorry.
I lost my space here, in the Bowman Bridge Forest Ridge Elementary School area?
This is Elementary School 42.
Okay. So same as for
Yeah.
the other ones.
But there's no, northeast and southeast are so.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Ms. Giles, you're on here.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind people about a couple of things. One is, as Mr. Gallagher pointed out, this is looking at 2019. We are coming into 16, 17. So this is a closure to development in these areas, but at the end of a 3-year period from that, they can go forward. So we are looking at things that are further out than we may be thinking when we're sitting here talking. The other is that on the St. John's Lane piece, there was concern about a particular parcel that was requesting to be changed from senior housing to more active housing. That actually has been voted down. That won't be happening. So that's at least one concern off the plate for right now, that still will go forward as senior housing, which is not impacted by the APFO chart necessarily.
And seniors are active.
Yeah, because, but more active people that would have children. The other is that with the development of downtown Columbia, we have been communicating, Mr. Gallagher has been communicating over time as different options were being floated about how the affordable thing might work. And so with the idea that additional units might be coming into that mix, there was additional discussion about what the impact on us would be in order to accommodate that once they put the tests that are in the SEPA in place, and we can see what they mean. So there's much more interaction on this and involvement as it goes along. It's hard to see that reflected in a chart that's 3 years out when the plans for downtown Columbia are 30 years out. So when people talk about X number of units, they don't all come at one time, they come over a period of time. But this reflects where we believe their impact will be, 3 years out. So that's what we have to keeping in front of the planning board and in front of the county council and in front of the zoning board as they're looking at these projects. I, though, am as concerned about the fact, not just the 3-year, because my general feeling is that it doesn't matter what you do to APFO. If it doesn't have teeth, it doesn't matter. If after 3 years, whatever controls you put in place aren't there, it really doesn't matter. It provides some slowdown, sort of some gatekeeping, but it doesn't stop it. The worst thing is that if housing allocations haven't been used, there's generally an annual housing allocation. If it hasn't been used, they can all be released in any 1 year. Okay, the unused ones, so you have 1,500 a year, but if you've, over the last 4 years, they're still in reserve units, those could all come on at one time, and it's almost impossible to plan for that, because you don't know what that would look like, because that's not how it's meant to happen, but it's as it could. So I think it's imperative that we keep our eyes on this and try to make sure people are aware of what the impact is. Equally, however, the impact of denying $40 million worth of capital projects in the county executive's capital budget for what we need in order to meet the needs that we already foresee, and what that ends up pushing out further and further to exacerbate these things that we're looking at in 2019, you need to keep in mind as well. Every time we can't go forward with the programs that we put in place in order to try and keep up with what's happening, we get to a more difficult place, and the situation gets more and more concerning.
Yeah, if I could just call your attention to one thing that happened in the committee that is related to that, and we'll obviously talk about it in another meeting, but since you're having this budget discussion, it's very important to consider. Mr. Browna, who works for the Department of Planning and Zoning, talks about this Apfo law as being a bargain, a grand bargain, and it's the idea is that you can control growth in a number of different ways. You could stop it. You could force developers like my colleagues on the other side of the river to proffer, or say build a school for us, or you could have something like what our law is, which includes time, and then what that time is for the county to come back and do what Mrs. Giles just mentioned, which is budget for the capital projects. So cutting that capital project calls this into question, and so all they're really doing is going to be creating more red in these charts by cutting those capital projects. So fortunately, in some ways, the law is there. It at least gives you that cover as an organization with adequate facilities, but I was very surprised by some of those recommendations myself.
Okay, we still have some more names. Mrs. DeLacy.
Oh, no.
Mrs. Valancourt?
I just wanted to, I would press back when we were chuckling with Dr. Altwerger, that it is not any kind of, it is the best thing that new eyes look at this stuff, because it's so tempting to just say, that is just a problem that's never going to be fixed. And you need people new people to come in and say, why not? Look at this, fix this. We have to keep energy behind it. I'm very pleased that there are still people who want to put energy behind this. Thank you.
I would say there was a lot of energy put in on our task force, wasn't there, Joel?
Yeah.
Whew! When I looked at those things, I couldn't understand. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead, Mrs. DeLacy. Mrs. Giles, go ahead.
Okay. I will move that we approve the Apfo chart for submittal to the Howard County Council.
Put your mic down.
Sorry.
One more time.
Approve the Apfo chart for submittal to the Howard County Council for their adoption.
Second.
I have a motion by Mrs. Giles and a second by Dr. Siddiqui. Ms. DeLacy?
Does it matter whether I approve it or not?
Yep, it has to be approved.
Okay. Yes.
Ms. Valancourt?
Yes.
Ms. Lynn?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Connor?
Yes.
Mrs. Giles?
Yes.
Dr. Altwerger?
Yes.
Mrs. French?
Yes.
Dr. Siddiqui?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Gallagher.
Joel. It's a lot of hard work.
We have to keep the wheels moving. Okay.